Hello and welcome to Jese James Beads. My name is Jem and today we're talking Iris Apfel. I want to make a pair of statement earrings with you utilising these absolutely gorgeous beads. Let's head down to the board and take a look at that technique together. From the Iris Apfel collection, I've got the most gorgeous statement strand here. I'm going to be cutting this in a moment and I'll be using two of these large turquoise coloured pad shaped beads. I'm also going to be using some of this fantastic green chain. Now the really clever thing about this is how easy it is to separate it out. I'm going to be using 5 links to drop from the bottom of my earring. So let's count 5 links in, find a little space, and then we'll just unhook those 5 links that we're going to be using. Let's put the rest of that out of the way. So we've got multi-tonal metals there, some really beautiful bead spacers and an assortment of colourways and textures there alongside that gorgeous turquoise hue. So we're going to be working with one of the big pads per earring plus 5 links on that gorgeous green chain. I'm going to be using some 18 gauge round wire. This is a medium temper copper that I'm working with, and in terms of tools I'll be using chain nose pliers, flush cutters and my bail making pliers. Now you can use your round nose pliers if that's what you have available, not a problem at all. What I would say is if you're going to use round nose pliers, maybe use a little bit of permanent marker to define on those pliers exactly where you want your loops to occur. So the first thing we're going to do is to cut a 12-inch length of that 18 gauge wire, give that central section a lovely warm through, and about 1/3 of the way along that strand I'm going to start working. Now I'm going to use number 2 on my bail making pliers, and I'm going to create a series of loops just by rotating that wire around. Now you can use really whichever technique is kindest to your hands, but that's what we're looking to have. 1 loop. We want it to be quite flat on that piece of wire. We want the wire to go smoothly along and then stop every now and again to add in a loop. So I'm going to add in another loop now. I'm going to bring that tail all the way around, hopefully hitting everything in its flight path, all the way back over the top, and then just down and around. So let's just bring those loops slightly closer together. There's my second loop. Now I think they're a little bit too far apart because what I want to happen is to have 4 loops sitting over the face of my pad bead. So you do need to keep them relatively close together but not quite touching. So if you need to address how far apart they are, you can just push that baseline of wire until they sit close enough together. And if you find that you disrupt that flat baseline, you can pop on in with your chain nose pliers just to sort that out. So let's add another 2 loops and I think we'll be ready to move on to the next stage. So let's bring that next one around. Again, you won't have to worry quite so much about where that wire's going. I don't want to hit the camera. So there we go. Let's have a look and see if that loop looks good. Could be a little bit neater, so let's just verify that we want that to sit quite close together but not touching. And you can just straighten that wire out if you need to. So we've got 1 more loop to add on. So again, I'm using loop number 2 on my looping or bail making pliers. Draw that wire all the way around. And you won't have to do this quite so far away from your face, so you'll be fine. Let's draw that across a little bit. There we are. So I would definitely take some time to make sure that those loops are exactly where I want them to be. So if you need to move a loop along a little bit, just pop that pin back in, rotate the wire around and just give it a little bit of heat and warmth and you'll find that it will sit where you need it to. So do take some time to just get those absolutely perfect. And then just pop that to one side until we're ready to use it. So let's just pop that out of the way. We're now going to use a shorter length of that 18 gauge round wire, and I have here a length of around about 5 to 6 inches. Just give that a very gentle warm through, and we're going to pop that through the centre of our beautiful pad shaped bead. So you should have a good 1.5 to 2 inches out either end. You could also be using the 2 oval, beautiful beads that also form part of this collection. So on either side of that central bead, whether you're using the oval or the beautiful rectangle pad cushion, I'm just going to turn some right angle bends. Now I want them to be at 90 degrees to each other, so why don't we make that loop first? For the first loop, I'm going to use number 2 on my bail making pliers, which is about 2/3 of the way up your standard round nose pliers. Draw that wire all the way around until you have a round form. If it's easier for you, you can do this without the bead on, but it's helpful to put the bead on so that you get your angle changes in the right place. We do want that to sit centrally on the end of the wire, so you can just rotate that around until it sits exactly where you want it to. Do try and keep it as round as possible. I'm just going to turn about 3 or 4 rotations of wire, and you do have plenty here to work with. Let's just leave that sitting over to one side for the moment until we've added on our piece of beautiful turquoise colour material. Slide that up into position. Now we'll deal with that tail in just a second. I don't want this to be super tight, just sitting very, very nicely. Now because I want those loops to be at opposition to one another, I want this one to come up and away while the upper one is nice and flat. So just push that towards me. So as long as they're at 90 degrees, turn that over. That one's now sideways. This one is going off to the edge there. Now for the lower of the 2 loops, I definitely want to have a larger loop. So I'm going to use number 3 on my bail makers, which is the bottom of your standard round nose pliers as an equivalent. So let's draw that tail all the way around. Make sure that sits centrally. Once you're happy that that is round and centralized, we're just going to tie that around the central core wire. So let's bring that into position. I'm gripping relatively firmly. You've seen me do quite a few of these little wrapped loops now. So I'm going to go as far as I can. Having that bead rotating around is really useful, and I'm just going to push that over to the rear of that loop. Let's just tidy that up slightly. If you use the curved side of your chain nose pliers, if you have bent chain nose pliers, it's less likely to damage that bead. So I'm just going to push that all the way around and then trim that last teeny tiny little bit away. Into the scrap pot it goes. Well, it went for it, it's nearly there. Make sure that that's nice and smooth, and then we can trim away the other piece when we know that we've got enough space to do so. So I'm going to take that to the rear as we were looking at it a second ago, and let's get that squished down as well. Nice little squish there to make it neat and tidy. So we've got one loop that sits flat to the board and the other loop sits at 90 degrees, and the big one is the 90 degrees one, the larger of the 2 loops. So that's the crux of today's tutorial. Let's find that looped section next. So as you can see, I've already prepared one of the pair of earrings. I'm going to do the second one now. Because my earring findings have a loop that travels the same direction as the wire, I need the loop at the top, the smaller of the 2 loops we made, to be sideways so that they will fit together later. And the large loop down at the bottom will be opposite to the desk. So what we're going to do now is mirror image the first earring, in which I have those loops spiraling away over to the right hand side. So I'm just going to do that in opposition on the left hand side. We're just going to create a little bit of a gentle arc. Ideally, you will want to have those loops the same size on both sides. If you find that one is slightly out of whack, you can pop your round nose pliers back in and just roll that away slightly until they do meet your requirements. So let's just line that up. That looks pretty good to me, so I'm going to have these ones spiralling away to the left-hand side of that large cushion. So these may rotate for the moment, don't worry about it, we will sort that out in a second. Let's just hold that gently arcing piece of looped wire over the top of that pad, pinch very, very firmly, and I'm going to take one of those tails and wrap it as close as I can to the bead just at the top. I'm going to take that round a couple of times at least, and ensure that I have around about an inch of wire left. Doesn't really matter if you get 2 or 3 wraps at this stage, because we will be making a spiral and pushing it down. So at the other end of that pad, we're going to do the exact same thing. Again, push that down firmly against that large pad bead, draw the wire encircling the spiral we made earlier, and bring both of those wires over to the same side. So if you see it in its finished orientation, it will look like this. So I trimmed both of these wires to make spirals to 1 inch, and I did use a ruler for that. I'm not going to do that right now, I'm just going to eyeball it. So let's just double check. They look very similar to me. What we're going to do is use the smallest loop, or you could use the tip of your round nose pliers, to create a spiral form, and I'll just show you one of those because it's exactly the same. Start rotating around until you get best part of a circle, and then push that spiral into your non-dominant hand, bringing that spiral as close as you can to the centre of that core wire. You can then just grip hold of that little spiral and push it up and away, so that it sits just at the top like so. I'll do exactly the same at the bottom now. So I've got spirals at either end, everything is nice and securely held together, and I've added in my earring finding at the top. Now with this beautiful green chain, if you turn each of those little curb links around, they will nestle back in, whether the cut is at the top or at the bottom. So what we're going to do is find that larger loop that we created, slide in the chain, and then we're just going to rotate that piece of curb chain around so that the loop sits down towards the next link of the chain. And there you have your Iris Apfel inspired designer statement earrings.